The red circle on the stage looked impossibly small from the wings, but the words, "You're not our daughter anymore," echoed in my head like a stadium announcement. I adjusted my blazer, took one final breath, and walked out to face 3,000 people and 16 cameras that would broadcast my voice to millions. The ultimate revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's thriving so spectacularly, they're forced to watch from the shadows. My parents disowned me exactly 371 days ago, I began, my voice eerily steady despite the thundering in my chest. Today I'm going to tell you why that was the best thing that ever happened to me. The audience leaned forward slightly. That collective shift of energy when people realize they're about to hear something raw and real. In my peripheral vision, I caught the TED curator giving me an encouraging nod. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It was about to become a narrative that might save someone else drowning in other people's expectations. Funny how life works. 1 year ago, I was sobbing on a bed in a cheap Boston sublet, wondering how I'd make rent. Now I was delivering the closing talk at TED Women, with 6 venture capitalists waiting to meet me afterward. Let me back up a bit, because the journey from family pariah to TED speaker wasn't exactly a straight line. My name is Maya Chen, and this is the story of how I lost a family, but found my voice. What do you mean you're not applying to medical school? My father's voice was dangerously quiet, the tone he reserved for profound disappointment. He placed his fork down with surgical precision, the gesture more threatening than if he'd thrown it. We were seated at our dining table in suburban Connecticut, the same table where I'd done homework for 18 years, where I'd been handed early acceptance letters to Yale, where my MCAT prep books had been stacked in threatening towers. I was home for Thanksgiving break during my senior year of college, and I'd just dropped the bomb I'd been rehearsing for months. I've decided to pursue my startup idea full-time after graduation instead, I repeated, fighting to keep my voice from shaking. The accelerator program accepted my application. It's a huge opportunity. A huge opportunity to throw away everything we've worked for, my mother interjected, her accent thickening with emotion. Do you know what we sacrificed to give you this education? I did know. The stories of their immigration struggles, my father's 3 jobs, my mother's abandoned dreams. These narratives formed the scaffolding of my childhood. Their sacrifices weren't just mentioned. They were weaponized, deployed strategically whenever I showed the slightest deviation from their prescribed path. This isn't about your sacrifices, I said, immediately regretting my word choice. I mean, I'm grateful for everything, but grateful? My father's laugh was hollow. You sound like an American teenager. All entitlement, no respect. Dad, the healthcare app I've designed could help thousands of immigrants navigate the medical system. People like Grandma who died because she couldn't. Understand? Don't you dare use your grandmother to justify this rebellion. My mother's voice sliced through the air. Medicine is how you help people. Real medicine, with a white coat and MD after your name. I took a deep breath. The world has changed. There are multiple ways to make an impact now. My app, your app, my father mocked. Some little computer program you think will change the world, while real doctors save lives. I've already accepted. The accelerator spot, I said quietly. They're providing seed funding and mentorship. I start in June. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind that rings in your ears from its totality. My parents exchanged a look I'd seen before, but never directed at me. It was the look reserved for family members who had brought shame, cousins who had married outside our culture, an uncle with a gambling problem. If you do this, my father finally said, each word precisely measured, you are choosing to turn. You're back on everything we've built for you, everything we value. I'm not turning my back on anything. I'm just choosing a different? My mother laughed bitterly. Different is a hobby. Different is something you do on weekends. This is betrayal. It's my life, I said, my voice finally breaking. Don't I get any say in it? My father stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the hardwood with funeral finality. Your life. Exactly. If this is your choice, then you can support this life yourself. No more tuition, no more apartment, no more health insurance. Dad, that's not... If you're adult enough to reject everything we've planned for you, you're adult enough to pay your own way. The theoretical independence I'd imagined when making my decision suddenly crystallized into terrifying reality. My final semester's tuition was due in 3 weeks. My apartment in New Haven was paid through the school year, but after that, the accelerator provided a stipend, but barely enough for ramen and a shared bedroom in Boston. You would really cut me off? I asked, my voice small. Over this? My mother's face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. If you choose this path, you choose to no longer be our daughter. The words hung in the air between us, monstrous and impossible. Not their daughter? I'd been their daughter for 21 years. It was the foundation of my identity, the North Star of my existence. How could a career choice, even one they disagreed with, possibly negate that fundamental relationship? You don't mean that, I whispered. Test us and find out, my father replied. I looked between them, these people I'd spent my life trying to please, whose approval had been the currency of my happiness for as long as I could remember. In their eyes, I saw only ultimatum. No negotiation, no compromise. Something snapped inside me. A lifetime of accumulated compliance suddenly collapsed under the weight of this final, impossible demand. Then I guess I'm not your daughter anymore, I said, pushing back from the table. I packed my things in silence that night, the house creaking around me as if in protest. My parents remained downstairs, their absence from my packing more painful than if they'd yelled or argued further. By morning, I was gone, back to campus 3 days early, my childhood bedroom left pristine, as if I'd never disturbed its perfection with my presence. I believed, with the naivety that only privilege can afford, that they would come around. That this was a scare tactic, a final attempt to course-correct my rebellion. Finals came and went. Christmas approached. The tuition deadline loomed like a gathering storm. I called home on December 15th, exactly 3 weeks after Thanksgiving. My mother answered on the 4th ring. Hello? Mom, it's me. Can we talk about... Did you submit your medical school applications? Her voice was businesslike, stripped of maternal warmth. No, Mom, I told you, I'm not... The line went dead. I stared at my phone in disbelief, then called back immediately. It went straight to voicemail. I tried my father's cell. Same result. Emails bounced back with automated responses. Their WeChat accounts blocked me. It was as if I'd been erased from their digital existence with clinical precision. The final confirmation came 2 days before Christmas, when I received an email from the bursar's office. My tuition payment had been reversed. My student account was now delinquent in the amount of $29,436. They had actually done it. Cut me off completely. Financially, emotionally, familially, excised like a tumor they feared might spread. I spent Christmas in my empty dorm building, one of 3 international students who couldn't go home for the holidays. Except I wasn't international. My home was just a 2-hour drive away, in a house where my bedroom remained undisturbed, preserved like a memorial to the daughter who had once existed, but was now dead to them. The next few months blur together, in my memory, a frantic collage of survival. I applied for emergency financial aid, took out last-minute private loans at predatory interest rates, picked up bartending shifts that left me stumbling into 8 a.m. classes smelling of tequila and desperation. My GPA, once pristine, developed hairline fractures that threatened the foundation of my academic identity. But I graduated. Barely, but with diploma in hand, I boarded a bus to Boston with $412 in my bank account and a spot in the accelerator program that had cost me everything. The cohort consisted of 12 founders, each with ideas that sparkled with innovation and ambition. There was Darius with his sustainable farming technology, Imani with her fashion marketplace for Black designers, Trevor with his carbon capture startup, and then there was me, with dark circles under my eyes and a healthcare navigation app, born from watching my grandmother die because she couldn't understand her discharge instructions. On paper, I belonged among these bright minds. In reality, I felt like an imposter playing entrepreneur while silently drowning in grief for a family who had chosen to amputate me from their lives. The accelerator provided desk space, mentors, workshops, and a monthly stipend that covered approximately half of what I needed to survive in Boston. I found a sublet in Somerville, a glorified closet in an apartment shared with 3 roommates. I picked up weekend shifts at a coffee shop near MIT, serving lattes to students whose parents still claimed them on their tax returns. During the day, I coded and pitched and networked with the manic energy of someone who had no backup plan. At night, I curled around my phone, staring at my parents' contact information, wondering if this would be the day they'd soften, reach out, recognize that children are not conditional investments. They never did. But something unexpected happened. In that painful void, something I wouldn't recognize until much later. I began to hear my own voice, not the echo of my parents' expectations, not the performance of the perfect daughter, but my actual thoughts, desires, and convictions. It started small. The freedom to sleep until 7 a.m. instead of 5:30. The choice to drink coffee instead of green tea. The revelation that I actually hated classical music and preferred hip-hop when coding. Trivial decisions that had always been subtly shaped by anticipated parental judgment. As these small freedoms accumulated, larger ones emerged. I pivoted my app's focus based on user research rather than prestige factors. I dressed for comfort, in meetings rather than propriety. I dated people my parents would have dismissed as unsuitable, including Sarah, a brilliant UI designer who taught me that my sexuality wasn't something to suppress for familial harmony. 3 months into the accelerator, my app, now called ClearHealth, had evolved from a translation tool into a comprehensive patient advocacy platform. We had 200 beta users, mostly from Boston's immigrant communities, and preliminary data showing a 40% reduction in missed follow-up appointments among our users. "You've found your product-market fit," my mentor Julian told me after I presented these results. "Now you need to tell your story. The founder's journey is as important as the product when you're seeking investment." My story? I laughed nervously. "I'm not sure that's something investors want to hear." Julian leaned back in his chair, studying me with the penetrating gaze that had made him a successful venture capitalist. "Your grandmother's experience is compelling, but it's not unique. What is unique is you, a first-generation American woman who chose entrepreneurship over the safety of traditional expectations, who risked everything, including family relationships, because you believed in solving this problem." I shifted uncomfortably. "I don't talk about that part." "Maybe you should. Authenticity resonates, Maya, especially for mission-driven startups." That night, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror of my shared apartment. Who was I without the narrative my parents had crafted? Without being Dr. Chen's daughter, the future physician, the fulfillment of immigrant dreams? Strip away those labels, and what remained? A woman with dark circles and determination. A founder with first-hand knowledge of cultural barriers to healthcare. Someone who had lost everything familiar, but was building something new from the rubble. Perhaps that was a story worth telling. The next day, I rewrote my pitch deck. Instead of opening with market size and opportunity, I began with my grandmother, confused by discharge instructions in a language she barely understood, too embarrassed to ask for clarification, dying from preventable complications 3 weeks later. I included a photo of us together when I was 12. Then I added something I'd never spoken aloud. How her death had inspired me to pursue medicine initially, but how I'd realized technology could potentially help thousands of patients like her, not just the few I could treat personally as a doctor. I practiced this new pitch obsessively, first alone in our shared kitchen at 5 a.m., then with roommates, then with fellow founders. Each time, the story became more fluid, more authentic, less painful to articulate. By the time demo day arrived, the culmination of the accelerator program where we'd pitched to a room full of investors, I had transformed my personal trauma into narrative gold. The lights in the presentation hall were blinding, but I found my voice anyway. For 3 minutes and 40 seconds, I told my story, our story, my grandmother's, mine. The thousands of patients caught in a system not designed for them. When I finished, the applause was immediate and sustained. Afterward, investors crowded. Around my demo table, business cards appeared from designer wallets. Follow-up meetings were scheduled in sleek downtown offices. By that evening, I had 3 investment offers, each more generous than anything I dared hope for. "This is just the beginning," Julian told me at the after-party, clinking his glass against mine. "You've found your voice. Now people are listening." 6 months later, ClearHealth had secured $1.2 million in seed funding, hired 4 employees, and expanded to 3 cities. We'd partnered with 2 major hospital systems and were on track to hit 10,000 users by year's end. The tiny sublet was replaced by an actual apartment, the coffee shop job abandoned in favor of a modest but livable founder's salary. Success didn't heal the wound of family rejection, but it scabbed over enough that I could function without constant pain. I still checked my phone each morning for messages that never came, still drafted emails I never sent, still dreamed of reconciliation scenarios that grew increasingly fantastical as months passed. Then came the email that would change everything, and an invitation to speak at TED Women. "We're looking for voices that challenge conventional narratives about success, family, and cultural expectations," the curator wrote. "Your journey from medical school expectations to healthcare tech founder is exactly the kind of perspective our audience needs to hear." My finger hovered over the delete button. Public speaking wasn't my strength. My pitch success had been driven by necessity and adrenaline, not natural talent. And to speak so publicly about the most painful chapter of my life? To potentially embarrass my parents on an international stage? I was about to decline when a notification appeared on my phone, a message from one of our users, an elderly Vietnamese man in Chicago. He'd attached a photo of himself with his doctor, both smiling. "First time understanding everything at appointment?" His message read. "No need for grandson to miss work. Your app gave me my dignity." His dignity. The word resonated through me like a tuning fork struck against bone. What was dignity if not the right to choose your own path? To speak your own truth? To live authentically even when those choices cost you dearly? I accepted the TED invitation. For the next 8 weeks, I worked with a speaking coach, crafting and refining a narrative that had lived primarily in my own head until now. We discussed how much personal detail to include, how to honor my cultural background while critiquing its constraints, how to transform private pain into public wisdom. "Remember," my coach advised, "this isn't about vilifying your parents or their values. It's about the universal struggle between honoring our roots and growing our own branches." The metaphor stayed with me as I rehearsed my talk, in front of mirrors, co-workers, strangers at practice events. Each iteration became more refined, more nuanced, less about rejection, and more about redefinition. 2 weeks before the event, in a moment of either courage or madness, I sent my parents the link to the TED Women speaker lineup. No accompanying message, just the link containing my headshot, bio, and talk title, "Daughter of Expectation, Mother of Innovation." No response came. I hadn't really expected one, but the silence still stung with familiar sharpness. The night before my talk, I called the only person who might understand both sides of my cultural divide, my mother's sister, Aunt Lynn, who had maintained cautious contact despite my parents' decree. "They know about your talk," she said quietly after preliminary pleasantries. "Your father saw the link." My heart stuttered. "Did they say anything?" "Not directly, but your mother asked me if I'd seen you recently, if you were, well, it wasn't much, a crumb of concern rather than a feast of reconciliation, but it was the first acknowledgement of my continued existence in nearly a year." "Tell them I'm well," I said, throat tight with unshed tears. "Tell them they can watch the live stream tomorrow if they want to understand why I made the choices I did." "I will tell them," Aunt Lynn promised, though we both knew it might make no difference. That night, I barely slept, my mind cycling through versions of my talk, imagining my parents watching, alternately proud and horrified. By morning, I was running on adrenaline and triple-shot espresso, my hands slightly trembling as the makeup artist prepared me for the bright stage lights. "5 minutes, Ms. Chen," a production assistant announced, guiding me toward the stage. Wings. I peered out at the audience, 3,000 seats filled with people who had come to be inspired, challenged, moved. Somewhere out there might be other first-generation Americans caught between worlds. Somewhere might be parents struggling to understand children making choices they couldn't comprehend. Somewhere might be young women silencing their own voices to maintain harmony. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to all of them, too. The speaker before me finished to enthusiastic applause. The stage manager gave me a nod. It was time. The red circle on the stage looked impossibly small from the wings, but the words, "You're not our daughter anymore," echoed in my head like a stadium announcement. I adjusted my blazer, took one final breath, and walked out to face 3,000 people and 16 cameras that would broadcast my voice to millions. My parents disowned me exactly 371 days ago, I began, my voice eerily steady despite the thundering in my chest. Today, I'm going to tell you why that was the best thing that ever happened to me. For the next 16 minutes, I spoke without notes, about immigrant dreams and generational trauma, about the weight of expectations, and the freedom of authenticity, about losing family but finding purpose. I shared my grandmother's story, my parents' sacrifices, my own rebellion, and subsequent reconstruction of identity. The hardest lesson I've learned, I said near the conclusion, is that sometimes the people who love you most cannot love the king. Most authentic version of you. Their love is conditional on your fulfillment of their dreams. And while I understand now why my parents needed that certainty, after lives defined by upheaval and sacrifice, I couldn't keep living for their validation at the expense of my own truth. I paused, looking directly into the main camera, wondering if somewhere they were watching. To my parents, if you're listening, I built something valuable, not despite turning away from your path, but because I found my own. I help thousands of patients like Grandma navigate a system that failed her. I've created jobs and purpose and community, not as a doctor, but as a founder, not as your reflection, but as myself. The silence in the auditorium was complete. That rare, charged silence that happens when a room full of people collectively holds their breath. So if you ask me whether I regret my choice, whether the cost was too high, my answer is this. I lost my family, but I found my voice, and that voice has helped thousands of others find theirs. Perhaps someday it will even help us find each other again. I stepped back from the microphone as applause erupted, first scattered, then building to a thunderous standing ovation that washed over me in waves. Tears blurred my vision as I bowed slightly and walked off stage, legs somehow supporting me despite feeling like liquid. In the wings, the curator embraced me, whispering congratulations. Other speakers offered tissues and water. My phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket, messages from teammates watching the live stream, from investors, from users who had recognized me, but none from the numbers I still checked first, still hoped, for most. The remainder of the conference passed in a surreal blur. My talk was uploaded to the TED website that evening, accumulating views at a pace that made the social media team raise eyebrows. Venture capitalists who had previously passed on Clear Health now requested meetings. Reporters wanted interviews about both the company and my personal journey. 3 days later, I returned to Boston, emotionally exhausted, but professionally energized. Our user numbers had spiked following the publicity, with waitlists forming, in cities we hadn't yet launched in. My team greeted me with champagne and a cake decorated with the TED Women logo and frosting. To finding your voice, Julian toasted, now both mentor and investor in Clear Health. And using it for good, I added, clinking glasses with my growing team. That evening, as I finally returned to my apartment, the notification I had stopped allowing myself to hope for appeared on my phone screen, an email from my father's address. For several minutes, I simply stared at it, afraid to open what might contain further rejection or criticism. Finally, finger trembling slightly, I tapped the screen. "Maya, we watched your talk." Your mother cried. I did too, though I would have denied it before. We do not understand the choices you have made, but we saw the audience's reaction. We saw that you have built something meaningful, even if it is not what we envisioned for you. Your grandmother would have been proud of what you have created for people like her. Perhaps we should be too. If you are willing, we would like to meet for tea next time you are in Connecticut, not as the daughter we expected, but as the woman you have become. Dad, it wasn't a complete reconciliation. It offered no apologies for the financial abandonment, the emotional excommunication, the 13 months of silence. But it was an opening, a crack in a door I had believed permanently sealed. I read the message again, tears blurring the screen. Then I began to type my response, my fingers finding the words my voice had been preparing to say all along. Dad, thank you for reaching out. Thank you for watching. I would like to meet for tea. Not as the daughter you expected, but as the woman. I am still becoming. I am in Boston now, building something I believe matters. I have a voice that is finally my own. But there will always be space in that voice for family, not as its directors, but as its witnesses, and perhaps someday, its collaborators. Send me dates that work for you and Mom. I will make the trip. Home. I pressed send, then set down my phone, gazing out at the Boston skyline from my apartment window. The red circle of the TED stage had seemed so small, but it had somehow created space large enough for both my truth and the possibility of reconciliation. Finding my voice hadn't just been about speaking, it had been about being heard, not just by an audience of strangers, but finally, perhaps, by the people who had once known me best and yet not known me at all. Tomorrow would bring more pitches, more code, more users needing their medical information translated and explained. But tonight, I allowed myself to simply exist in this moment of potential. No longer just my parents' denied daughter, not just a founder with a compelling origin story, but Maya Chen, complete in herself, speaking her truth from whatever stage life provided. Sometimes the most powerful words aren't "I love you" or even "I forgive you," but simply "I am here," as myself. And sometimes that's enough to begin again.